Where are you as you listen to this? Maybe it's late, past midnight. Perhaps you are half asleep already, your room hushed. The glow of your screen the only fire left awake in the modern night. But let that light dim. Let the hum of the present dissolve. Tonight, we are traveling backward, not just beyond time zones, beyond calendars, beyond the names of kings, but into a silence so old it feels more like memory than history. Older than temples, older than writing, older even than the word civilization itself. This is not a lecture, nor a hurried scroll of facts. It is an invitation to listen slowly, to let the rhythm of words echo like the rhythm of a drum across a firelit clearing. Imagine yourself among ancestors who never saw a city, never counted years, yet carried whole worlds in their memory. For tens of thousands of nights, humans gathered in this way. A circle, a flame, a story. The first classroom, the first theater, the first sanctuary. They did not name it history. They did not record it in books. They remembered by telling. They sang the same myths until the stars themselves seemed stitched to the story. Tonight you join that circle. You are not an observer looking in. You are another figure leaning close to the fire, letting the present fall away. It is the year 10,000 before the Common Era. Cities have not yet been imagined. Governments, clocks, monuments, all are still sleeping in the far future. The earth is quieter, but not empty. Across the Levant, Eastern Africa, Europe, Asia, and beyond, small bands of humans rise with the sun and sleep by the embers. They live not as shadows of us, but as us, anatomically modern, as intelligent as any person today, and bound to their world in ways we have forgotten. Think of them not as cavemen, a word drawn from cartoons and caricature, but as wanderers, parents, storytellers, healers, musicians. They lived in groups of 20, 30, perhaps a little more, bands woven by kinship and trust. To survive required not savagery, but memory, which plants cured pain, which skies warned of rain, which rivers swelled too quickly to cross. These things were not written. They were known, repeated, embodied. If you like, imagine an ember before you. Watch it glow, breathe, pulse with the rhythm of a living heart. That ember was once the center of the world. To let it die was to invite cold. To keep it alive was to carry the sun through the dark. Around it, children whispered, elders spoke, and hunters sharpened their tools. And always, always, someone watched the flame. This is not just a documentary. It is not merely a tale about tools or bones. It is a return, a way of remembering what life truly felt like when the only architecture was light and memory, when the sky itself was the roof of every home. If you listen closely enough, you might hear footsteps crunching frost outside the shelter, or the faint breathing of kin asleep nearby. For more than 95% of human existence, this was life. Not skyscrapers, not borders, not machines, but a circle of warmth, a rhythm of seasons, and the story you are now about to hear. And so the ember glows, the night hushes, and the fire of memory opens before us. You wake before the sun does, not because of alarms or the tyranny of schedules, but because the fire beside you has sighed down to its last embers. Cold air leaks into the shelter, and someone must feed the coals before the night seeps too deeply into bone. You sit up slowly, wrapped in skins that smell faintly of ash and animal hide. The breath you release is visible, pale clouds in the dark air. The roof above you bends with the wind, a dome of willow branches and stitched hide. The walls shift and creak, alive as if they breathe with you. This is no weekend camping trip. It is your home, the same kind of home your ancestors have known for tens of millennia. Outside, the horizon still clings to its bruised blue. There is no clock, but the fading rhythm of night tells you what the day demands. You push aside the hide flap and step into the early world. Frost silvering reeds near the water's edge. A sky uncut by contrails or wires. No birdsong yet, only the faint murmur of insects and the distant whisper of cranes. The ground carries prints of last night's wanderers, animal tracks, small, bare human feet, the drag of a stick in the dirt. Already a few figures stir from their shelters, stretching against the chill. Your band numbers perhaps 25 souls, children, elders, siblings, companions. It is not a tribe in the way outsiders might imagine. It is closer to a family, though not bound only by blood. Some joined seasons ago, some were born here. Others might leave when food grows scarce. Mobility is not choice. It is survival. You move with rivers, with migrations, with ripening plants. Home is not a fixed place, but a pattern that repeats wherever the earth offers enough to sustain you. Before the day divides into tasks, there's the fire. Someone crouches, blowing carefully on the buried embers, coaxing them alive. Smoke threads upward. Dry twigs catch, then crackle, then blaze. For a moment, everyone draws close, palms hovering over warmth. The children press near, eyes shining. Fire is not owned by one. It belongs to the group. Its light is safety, its smoke a language, its warmth the pulse of life itself. Morning divides people gently. The very young and the very old will remain near camp, tending embers, preparing fibers, weaving baskets, scraping hides. A few others wander to the water's edge, checking nets or setting stones to trap fish. The rest scatter outward into the wild. Some will follow the memory of roots hidden beneath soil, berries clinging to shrubs, seeds loosening on stalks. Others, lean, strong, impatient with the restless energy of youth, will search for tracks. Gazelle, boar, maybe deer. The hunt will take them farther, and no one expects certain success. Yet even this division of labor is not rigid. Men forage as well as hunt. Women track animals as well as plants. Children accompany both, learning by being near, their small hands imitating every gesture. Knowledge cannot be separated from life. It moves in footsteps, in fingertips, in the stories murmured at night and recalled again in the morning. Notice what is absent. No bells to summon, no lists, no hierarchy shouting orders. The rhythm of the band is organic, pulsing with the light of day. When the sun grows warmer, bodies move outward. When the heat presses, they rest in shade. When shadows lengthen, they turn back toward one another. Time does not measure them. They measure time with their bodies. The modern world often imagines such mornings as desperate or harsh. But here, in the breath before the hunt, in the calm before the day stretches wide, there is no panic. There is no hunger gnawing at every moment. There is simply rhythm. Survival is work, yes, but it is also familiarity. The world, wild as it is deeply known, and so the sun climbs slowly. The day opens, embers glow bright, smoke drifts upward, and another morning of a world without cities begins. If you walked across the continents in this age, you would not find empires or roads, but you would find people. Small, scattered bands of sapiens whose worlds were as intimate and carefully tended as any city today. Though separated by distance, they lived in patterns strangely familiar to one another. A hearth, a cluster of shelters, laughter carried by wind. On the northern shore of a lake in what is today Israel lay a place we call Ohelo II. To its people, 23,000 years ago, it was simply water, reeds, birds, and fish. The camp here was made not of caves but of brush huts, domes woven from branches, low to the ground, covered in thatch and reeds. Step inside one, and you would find surprising order, grinding stones tucked in a corner, hearths carefully swept, sleeping mats woven from grass. Bones of gazelle and wild boar littered the ground, evidence of meals past. But they were not strewn carelessly. They were sorted, some broken to release marrow, some piled for tools. This was not chaos. It was householding, long before houses. Fire still burned at Ohelo, not because it had been struck anew, but because someone, always someone, had banked embers under ash overnight. To lose fire was to risk hunger and cold, to waste precious hours striking sparks. Keeping it alive was not instinct, but expertise. Children would grow up knowing which woods caught easily, which dried best, which grasses smoked too much. Fire was not a tool you used. It was a companion you tended. Travel north and back in time, and the landscape hardens. In what is now the Czech Republic, near Dolní Věstonice, the air sharpens with ice age cold. Here, more than 30,000 years ago, people built something remarkable, dwellings of mammoth bone. Imagine a ring of tusks and skulls stacked with precision, ribs and long bones laid into walls, clay and turf pressed into gaps, hides stretched across frames. These were not morbid trophies. They were engineering in a treeless plain. Inside, a hearth glowed red. Outside, reindeer hides dried in the frost. And within these bone villages, something else stirred. Art. Archaeologists here found the world's earliest known ceramics, figurines shaped from clay and fired deliberately. Some were small female forms, faceless and abstract, their hips and bellies exaggerated. Others were animals, many cracked or exploded in the fire. Were they offerings, tokens of memory, fertility charms, or simply experiments? We cannot say. But they prove that even in the midst of survival, people made time to shape the world into meaning. Step even farther back and south, and you reach Blombos Cave on the coast of South Africa, 75,000 years ago. Here, the sea crashed against cliffs, and inside the dark shelter, humans etched lines into red ochre, cross-hatched designs, deliberate, geometric. They strung shells into beads by drilling holes with patient skill. These were symbols, not accidents. Even before agriculture, before writing, people thought abstractly, created identity, wore memory on their skin. Each of these places, Ohalo, Dolní Věstonice, Blombos, whispers the same truth. Paleolithic life was not a blur of instinct. It was crafted, deliberate, full of meaning. The shelters, the art, the rituals of firekeeping, they show us that these were not primitive lives, but sophisticated, intelligent adaptations to place. And in every corner of the world, though the climate and materials changed, the pattern remained. A circle of people, a center of fire, the rhythm of work and story. A world alive not with monuments, but with memory. Wherever humans went, one constant followed: the fire. To wake and see embers glowing was to know that life had endured another night. To lose that glow was to risk hours of scraping stone, coaxing sparks, and praying the tinder would catch. It was no small task. Fire demanded guardianship, vigilance. Someone always watched it. An elder, a child, anyone restless in the night. To tend fire was not a chore, but a responsibility woven into existence itself. In the dim hours before dawn, fire was warmth against the cold. At midday it softened roots and grains, made flesh digestible, turned bitter into edible. At night, it drew predators back, their glowing eyes hesitating at the edge of the circle. Fire was technology, but it was also sanctuary, and it was architecture. Long before humans raised stone walls or carved temples, the hearth was the first true center. Around it, space organized itself. Mats for sleeping, stones for grinding, scraps of bone for tools. Archaeologists notice this pattern again and again. At Ohalo, at Dolny Vestanis, at camps scattered from Siberia to South Africa, the same design emerges. The fire at the center, life radiating outward. But fire's role reached further than survival. It was also memory's lantern. In its glow, stories took shape. A child learned the tale of the hunt, not by reading it, but by hearing it retold in the crackle of flames. Elders spoke of ancestors who had walked the same paths, followed the same herds, known the same stars. Around fire, history itself existed, not as a record, but as a performance, a shared inheritance. Even in silence, the flame taught. Watch how resin changes color as it burns, how sparks leap from dry wood, how smoke curls in different directions with the wind. This was the first laboratory, the first classroom, a place where questions rose with the smoke and answers flickered in the dance of heat and light. There is something else, the trance of fire. If you have ever stared too long into flames and felt your thoughts loosen, your mind drifting into places half-dreamt, then you have known what our ancestors knew. Fire was more than practical. It was meditative, hypnotic, a mirror for imagination. Perhaps the first gods were glimpsed in sparks. Perhaps the first myths in shifting shadows. Some anthropologists even argue that our very capacity for story, our ability to bind memory into narrative, was forged here, at the fire's edge. And so fire was not just tool, not just warmth. It was the sun brought down to earth, the heart of every camp, the axis around which human life turned. Where there was fire, there was food, safety, song, memory, and meaning. To leave a place was to scatter the ash. To return was to strike flame again, and to gather around it was to be human. Not every day meant the chase of animals or the clash of spears. More often, survival depended on quieter hands, on gathering, tasting, remembering. While hunters might be celebrated in stories, it was the foragers who fed the group day after day, season after season. Picture a small band moving outward from camp, baskets woven from reeds swinging at their sides. They walk barefoot, but each step lands with confidence. They know this land in a way most of us have forgotten. A glance at the soil tells them which roots lie beneath. The sound of insects hints at fruit hidden in the trees. The tilt of a flower's head whispers when its seeds are ripe enough to pluck. These were botanists without books, pharmacists without scrolls. Every plant was a page, every season a syllabus. They knew which bark numbed pain, which leaf could soothe fever, which tuber turned toxic if not roasted twice. The difference between food and poison might be a tiny red ring on a mushroom stalk, a bitterness that lingered too long on the tongue. Forgetting was not an option. Memory was survival, and this knowledge was not static. It was collective, woven and carried through time. A grandmother teaching her grandchild how to strip fibers from nettle stems, how to twist them into cord. A mother humming the names of plants as she pressed them into a child's palm. Stories remembered which tree bled sweet sap, which berries fattened before rain, which flowers bloomed just before the herds passed through. Modern science, peering into the hardened plaque of ancient teeth, has found traces of chamomile, yarrow, even plants with psychoactive compounds. These weren't random snacks. They were medicines, rituals, experiments in chemistry carried in the body. A shard of pollen on a stone blade, residue in the grooves of a grinding stone. These fragments reveal a sophisticated herbal knowledge, the kind we now take centuries of study to reclaim. In this world, women often led foraging groups, but the work was never just gathering, it was ecological mastery. They mapped groves across miles, remembered which trees bore sweeter fruit, recognized the rhythm of bees leading to hidden honey. Their knowledge was the anchor of the band. If hunters returned empty-handed, no one starved, because the foragers had filled baskets with acorns, figs, tubers, and seeds. Think of it. In 10,000 BCE, the earth was a vast library. The index was the sky, the seasons, the smells of rain and soil. The only way to read it was to live it. Day after day, year after year, a body became a walking encyclopedia of landscapes. When we imagine our ancestors, it is easy to picture stone blades and hunts, but harder to imagine the intimacy of knowing plants as kin. Yet this was the deeper truth. Survival was not only a contest of strength, but of attention, patience, and memory. To gather was not passive, it was an act of attunement. To walk through the forest was to be in conversation with it. And in that conversation, humanity found its longest rhythm. Not the strike of spears, but the quiet, enduring work of hands that remembered which leaf healed and which root harmed. The hunt was not daily, nor was it guaranteed. Most meals came from plants, roots, nuts, fish, steady foods that did not depend on luck. Yet when the hunt succeeded, it meant abundance. Marrow-rich bones, fresh hides, fat to burn as light, meat enough to share. The hunt was not routine. It was ritual, risk, and revelation all at once. Imagine the hunters preparing at dawn, spears tipped with flint blades or with microliths, tiny stone flakes set into wooden shafts, their edges serrated like teeth. Some carry atlatls, carved levers that hurl spears farther and harder than muscle alone. These were not crude tools. They were the result of centuries of trial, memory, and refinement. Design tested by failure and passed down until it became second nature. Tracking begins long before the chase. A broken twig, the sharp scent of urine carried on the wind, a hoof print pressed into mud. All signs speak if you know how to listen. The hunters move in silence, eyes searching the ground, ears tuned to birds, whose alarm calls betray the movement of hooves. To modern eyes, it might look like intuition, but it was skill, rehearsed and remembered. When the moment comes, the group works as one. A young gazelle darts. One startles it toward the others, another hurls a spear, another waits to cut off escape. There is shouting, yes, but also precision. The kill is never certain. Many hunts fail, and the hunters return with only sweat and stories. Yet those stories matter too. They are lessons, warnings, rituals retold by firelight. When the hunt succeeds, the work is only beginning. Knives of flint open the animal. Careful hands save sinew for cord, hides for clothing, bones for tools. Nothing is wasted. Fat is rendered for fuel, marrow sucked from bones, organs roasted quickly before spoiling. Children watch closely, learning where to cut, which parts feed strength, which must be burned away. And yet, for all its drama, hunting is not the heart of survival. It is the edge of it. Foraging filled most stomachs. Hunting filled the imagination. To bring down an animal larger than yourself was to dance with risk and return with triumph. It gave stories to the band, symbols to art, bones to shape into flutes. Even in failure, the hunt mattered. To run across the plain, to test your strength against another creature, was to feel your place in the wider rhythm of the world. The hunters returned not only with food, but with awe, reminders that life itself was fragile, fleeting, and shared between all who moved across the land. Hunting was never conquest. It was choreography, a negotiation between human cunning and animal strength, between hunger and respect. And in every thrown spear and every shared meal, the band reaffirmed the truth that survival was not about domination, but about balance, about knowing when to risk, when to retreat, and how to remember. There were no classrooms in the Paleolithic world, no chalkboards, no bells to mark the start of lessons. And yet every waking hour was a kind of education, one that wove itself into the fabric of daily life. Children learned not from lectures, but from presence, from watching, imitating, failing, and trying again. At dawn, the youngest might toddle after their mothers and aunts, clutching baskets far too big for their hands, pretending to forage. They pulled at grasses, tasted berries, learned through error which were sweet, and which left a bitter sting. Beside them, older children practiced stripping bark, weaving strands into cords, their fingers fumbling, their elders correcting with a glance or a gesture. No one separated play from work. Play was rehearsal, practice in disguise. The camp itself was a school. Flint knappers sat in the open, striking stone, sending sparks of skill into young eyes. Children crouched nearby, gathering the discarded flakes, copying the angle of the hand, the pressure of the strike. Their first scrapers were crude, edges uneven, but every mistake carved memory into their muscles. Archaeologists today can still see these lessons, the telltale marks of hesitation on small tools, the imperfect flakes of a child's hand preserved in stone. Around the hearth at night, stories carried knowledge deeper still. A tale about a trickster animal might seem like entertainment, but within it lay warnings about greed, about sharing, about the dangers of forgetting. Myths were mnemonic devices, binding practical lessons to rhythm and metaphor. To remember the story was to remember the survival it carried. Learning was not a separate phase of life. It was woven through every stage. A 6-year-old might care for a baby while also tagging along on a berry-gathering walk. A 10-year-old might already know the signs of rain in the wind or the tracks of a hare in fresh snow. By adolescence, children were not waiting to become useful. They already were. And the teachers were not just parents. Everyone in the band was responsible. An uncle correcting a grip on a spear, a grandmother showing how to grind seeds into flour, a sibling pointing out a constellation in the night sky. Anthropologists call this alloparenting, shared caregiving, but to the people themselves, it was simply life. A child belonged to the whole band, and the whole band carried the future in their care. Even elders who could no longer hunt or travel far remained vital teachers. Their memories stretched across decades of migrations, droughts, and hunts. They were living encyclopedias of the land, keeping the knowledge that children absorbed like breath. A story told by a fire was not entertainment. It was archive, syllabus, inheritance. This was education, not in books, but in bodies. Knowledge carried in scar tissue, in calloused hands, in the repetition of small acts. No tests, no grades, but consequences sharper than any exam. To forget a poisonous plant meant sickness. To mishandle fire meant danger. To ignore an elder's lesson meant hunger. And yet, this learning was not grim. It was playful, embedded in games, in mimicry, in laughter. Children chased insects, shaped mud into animals, pretended to stalk each other like hunters. In their play, they rehearsed survival, and in rehearsing, they remembered. To be a child in this world was to be immersed in life from the very beginning, never excluded, never sheltered from its rhythms. To grow was not to wait for adulthood, but to step into it, day by day, hand by hand, story by story.
Survival was never just about food and shelter. Even in the leanest times, humans shaped meaning from the world around them, leaving behind traces that still whisper across tens of thousands of years. Long before the first temples rose, there were marks on stone, beads strung on cord, figurines hidden in the ashes of a hearth. These fragments tell us something astonishing, that symbolism, imagination, and art are not luxuries. They are as old as humanity itself. Travel back 75,000 years to the southern coast of Africa. Inside Blombos Cave, humans sat near the fire and picked up ochre, a soft red mineral. They scored deliberate cross-hatched lines into it, patterns without obvious use, but not without purpose. The strokes were careful, repeated, intentional. On the cave floor, shells drilled with tiny holes lay in clusters. Strung together, they once formed necklaces or ornaments, the first jewelry of our kind. To wear such objects was to carry identity, to tell others silently who you were, what group you belonged to, perhaps even what you believed. Far away and much later, in the icy heart of Europe, people at Dolny Viestonets molded clay into figurines, the earliest ceramics known. Many were small, abstracted female forms, wide hips, rounded bellies, faceless heads. Some shattered in the fire, exploding in miniature bursts. Were they offerings? Fertility charms? Symbols of memory? We cannot be certain, but what we do know is that they were not idle doodles. They were meaning given form, belief hardened by flame, and then music. At sites like Hohlfels in Germany, archaeologists uncovered flutes carved from bird bone and mammoth ivory, dating back over 40,000 years. The finger holes were spaced in precise intervals, producing notes that fit scales still familiar today. Imagine the sound, thin, haunting, echoing in a cave or across a plain. It was not made for profit, not for an audience, but for presence. A way of making time audible, of binding a group in rhythm. Perhaps children danced, shadows flickering against stone, as the flute sang with the fire. Art was not separate from life. It was braided into it. To carve, to paint, to play music was to converse with the unseen, to remember the dead, to court the spirits of animals, to pass along stories that no tool alone could hold. Some scholars call this the birth of symbolic thought. But perhaps it is simpler than that. Perhaps it was the recognition, long before writing, that life without beauty is not survival at all. To make marks, to sing, to decorate a body with beads, these were ways of saying, we are here. We are more than hunger. We are more than bone and ash. Every flake of ochre, every bead, every note of music was a spark, carried forward across generations. They remind us that even in the harshest landscapes, people looked beyond necessity. They imagined. They dreamed. They made the invisible visible.
The day does not end with the hunt, nor with the gathering of roots and berries. As the sun lowers and shadows stretch across the plain, people return one by one, footsteps soft, baskets heavy or light depending on the earth's generosity. A faint column of smoke signals home long before the shelters come into view. The fire has been kept alive, tended all day, its embers now coaxed into fresh flame. Evening is gathering time. Meat hisses on stone slabs or spits, fat dripping and sparking into the coals. Seeds are ground, mixed with water, baked into flat cakes laid carefully on warm stones. Children linger close, impatient, stealing bits of roasted tuber, laughing when scolded gently. The camp fills with scent: smoke, charred bone, sweet grasses, the metallic tang of blood. When bellies are filled, the circle around the fire grows dense. There is no stage, no appointed storyteller, yet someone always begins. Perhaps it is an elder clearing their throat, or a hunter recalling the chase. The words are not only for entertainment, they are maps, instructions disguised as narrative. How the deer fled toward the river, how the clouds gathered before the rain, how, long ago, a woman first learned which roots cured fever. These are lessons embedded in memory, repeated until they become part of the body. But not all is instruction. Laughter ripples through the circle when a tale turns playful, when a trickster animal outsmarts a proud hunter, when a child pipes up with their own addition. Story is more than knowledge. It is glue, binding the band in shared rhythm. And sometimes, when the mood shifts, stories slide into song. The flute carved from a hollow bird bone comes out, or a drum skinned from deer hide. Voices rise, not polished, not rehearsed, but raw and alive. Some hum softly, some clap sticks together, others stamp feet into dust. The fire's glow turns every face gold, every shadow a dancer. The body releases what the day has held tight. For some, the music drifts into trance. The flames blur, the rhythm of the drum merges with the heartbeat. In these moments, the world feels porous. Human and animal, living and dead, earth and sky, all connected. A hunter might sway with eyes closed, seeing again the deer that fell, whispering thanks to its spirit. A healer might chant softly, calling on plants, on ancestors. Children fall asleep here, heads on their mothers' laps, lulled by the pulse of song. Elders close their eyes too, though their ears remain tuned to the stories. The fire's light flickers across closed eyelids, painting dreams, and so the circle endures. Evening around the fire was not pastime. It was the beating heart of Paleolithic life. Here, survival became story, hunger became ritual, and individuals became a whole. No stone monument, no written record could last as long as this nightly rhythm. Fire, food, story, song. And as the fire crackled against the cold, it carried with it something deeper than warmth. It carried memory. It carried belonging. It carried the knowledge that to be human was not only to survive the day, but to gather again at night and make the day into meaning. To imagine Paleolithic life is often to imagine fragility, short lives, constant danger, unending hunger. But the bones tell a different story. When scientists study the remains of foragers from this era, they find bodies lean and strong, joints shaped by long walking, muscles etched into bone. Teeth, though worn, often show fewer cavities than those of later farming peoples. The diet of a forager was varied, resilient, rich in nutrients we now struggle to balance. A meal might be berries crushed into a paste, fish roasted whole, marrow sucked from the bones of a deer, roots roasted until their bitterness softened, honey stolen from a wild hive. There was no single staple, no monotonous field of wheat or rice. Instead, the diet followed the seasons: fruits when they ripened, seeds when they fell, game when herds passed through, nuts shaken from trees in autumn winds. And within this variety lay protection. Early farmers, living centuries later, often depended on one crop: wheat, barley, millet, and their bones reveal stunted growth, malnutrition, crowded teeth, and disease. Foragers, by contrast, carried fewer of these burdens. They ate what the earth offered, and the earth offered widely. Health, too, was not luck alone. It was knowledge. Some plants soothed fever, others closed wounds, others dulled pain. Residues on teeth, pollen in burials, and bundles of dried herbs placed with the dead all speak of a sophisticated herbal medicine. Yarrow for bleeding, willow bark for pain, garlic mustard for flavor, and perhaps for healing. What we bottle now into tablets was once known by scent, by color, by generations of trial and memory. This is not to say life was easy. Bones reveal fractures, infections, arthritis, tooth loss. A fall from a tree could cripple, a poorly healed wound could linger. But here, another story emerges: care. Archaeologists have found skeletons of individuals who lived long despite severe disability. Missing teeth, withered limbs, blindness. Their survival was only possible because others fed and protected them. Health was not individual, it was collective. And there was resilience in rhythm. Long hours walking, resting when the body demanded, working with the sun instead of against it. This shaped endurance. Foragers slept when darkness fell, woke when light returned, their circadian rhythms aligned with fire and sky. No artificial light disrupted their cycles. No rigid clock fractured their rest. Illness and injury were inevitable, but community softened the blow. A broken bone healed straighter when others carried your share of work. A fever broke more safely when someone brought you herbs and water. Strength was not only in muscle, but in care, in shared responsibility. To modern eyes, we often imagine our ancestors as constantly sick, barely surviving. But the truth is more complicated. They lived within limits, yes, but they also thrived within them. They carried a wisdom of food and medicine we are only now beginning to rediscover. In their bodies, we see not weakness, but adaptation. In their diets, not deprivation, but abundance. And in their care for one another, the first lessons of resilience. Health not as the absence of pain, but as the presence of community. To live as a forager was not to drift randomly across the land, plucking what happened to appear. It was to walk through a living map, one inscribed not on paper but in memory, song, and story. Every hill, stream, and grove was remembered, visited in season, revisited in cycles that stretched across generations. Survival depended not just on taking from the land, but on knowing how to let the land give again. Consider Australia, tens of thousands of years before farming as we know it. Aboriginal peoples practiced what researchers now call fire stick farming, deliberately setting small, controlled burns. These fires cleared underbrush, encouraged new shoots, and drew grazing animals. To outside eyes, it looked wild, but in truth, it was management, an ecological engineering that made the land more abundant. In the Levant, around 20,000 years ago, people were already gathering stands of wild barley and wheat, returning to the same places year after year. Their grinding stones bear traces of starch from these grasses, their camps littered with husks. Some scholars believe they were already scattering seed, not yet fields, but patches, nudging the plants into growth, coaxing food into predictability. In North America, foragers managed forests by favoring nut-bearing trees, clearing space around oaks and chestnuts to ensure rich harvests. In the Amazon, ancient communities encouraged the growth of edible palms and fruit trees, creating landscapes that to this day hold a higher density of useful species than untouched forest. These were not accidents. They were choices, repeated across generations, guided by deep ecological knowledge. People knew when to harvest bulbs so they would regrow, when to leave young animals so herds would replenish, when to dig and when to wait. This was not exploitation, it was reciprocity. The seeds of agriculture, then, did not appear suddenly with the first villages. They grew slowly, scattered in these early practices, in the careful tending of plants and landscapes. Long before plows and fields, humans were already shaping environments in subtle, deliberate ways. This proto-agriculture was not yet domestication, not yet the tethering of life to rows of grain. It was partnership. The land was seen as generous, but generosity required respect. Myths and rituals reinforced this balance. To overharvest was not only foolish, it was taboo, a violation of the spirit of the plant or animal. And so, for tens of millennia, people lived in this rhythm, gathering but not exhausting, hunting but not erasing, tending but not enclosing. They understood what we so often forget, that abundance is fragile, that the future is shaped by the care we show in the present. From this delicate balance, the first true fields would one day grow. But in 10,000 BCE, what existed was something quieter, humbler, and perhaps wiser. An ecological intimacy so deep that humans were not masters of the land, but its attentive companions. For most of human history, home was not fixed. It shifted with the rains, with the herds, with the flowering of plants. To be alive in 10,000 BCE was to move in rhythm with the earth's own breath, carrying your shelter on your back, your memory in your steps. Picture a band breaking camp at dawn. Ashes are scattered into the wind. Hides are folded. Tools bound in bundles. What seemed a permanent place, the hearth, the shelters, the cleared paths, dissolves in a few hours, leaving little behind but faint impressions in the soil. By afternoon, the group is already walking, children perched on shoulders, dogs weaving between legs, elders leaning on sticks carved smooth with age. The path is not random, it is remembered. Each route was walked by grandparents and their grandparents before them. A certain grove of oaks will be heavy with acorns this season. A river bend will trap fish when the waters fall low. A stretch of open plain will bloom with tubers after the rains. These places are not just landmarks, they are promises, part of a mental calendar that extends beyond any written page. Movement brought both challenge and richness. The band carried only what was necessary: stone tools, cord, hides, fire bundled into smoldering branches. Everything else could be remade along the way. Shelter was not a house, but a skill. Food, not a storage room, but a knowledge of where to look. To move lightly was to survive. And yet, nomadism was not endless wandering. It was patterned, cyclical, familiar. A return to known waterholes, berry patches, migration corridors. Archaeologists find evidence of camps revisited for centuries. The same hearths rekindled, the same stones worn smooth by generations of hands. In this way, movement created a sense of home as strong as any village. Home was not walls, but pathways. Not a single place, but the network that connected them. With the seasons came ritual. A certain constellation appearing in the sky might signal time to move toward the coast. A certain bird call meant salmon were beginning their run upriver. People read the land the way we now read calendars. Each sign a reminder that time was not measured by numbers, but by return. This rhythm of movement shaped identity itself. A person was not simply from a place. They were from a circuit of places, tied to a whole landscape. The land was not owned, but shared, cared for, sung into memory. Even distant valleys and ridges might carry stories. Who camped there once? What spirits lived there? What food was found? To move was to weave oneself into this tapestry, to belong not to one home, but to many. Nomadic life may sound fragile to modern ears, but it was in fact resilient. When one valley failed, another offered. When herds shifted, people followed. To be tied to one patch of earth was riskier than to belong to many. And so, for thousands of years, people moved not out of desperation, but out of wisdom, living not as exiles, but as travelers in step with the turning of the seasons.